Hi, everyone. So we're taking some time now to really shift our discussion on recovery for the tourism and hospitality industry. Given our work in the Caribbean, we're reaching out to our Caribbean friends to find out how they're doing and how they're preparing for the next phase or the next step of their economy's reopening. So today we're joined by Mark Durliat, CEO and owner of Grace Bay Resorts in beautiful Turks and Caicos. Grace Bay Resorts has 3 luxury resorts across the island and also has a collection of private villas. As someone who's had an opportunity to visit many of the Grace Bay Resorts properties, I can tell you that they really are stunning and also have just the most incredible and heartwarming teams. So Mark, thank you so much for being with us today. We're excited to talk to you, and I know that through our conversation, we're also going to get a little bit of insight into what brought you to Turks and Caicos and some background on your career as well. Let's start by talking about how are you? How are things in Turks and Caicos?
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Amrita. I think probably what's most important for everybody to know is Turks and Caicos, like many jurisdictions in the Caribbean, we're forced to kind of close our doors of sorts to the tourism industry back in roughly March 27th, when the government decided to close the borders to international travel. And we have been in shock since then because, stopping hotel activity when you have large properties and lots of people and lots of different expectations and bookings is very difficult. And I think a lot of people, including myself, we've closed our hotels from time to time in the past, but you usually have a plan. When it stops on a dime like that, it is really difficult to adjust, and it's shocking to the system. So I think that's one of the things that everybody's really trying to deal with. On the ground here, our biggest challenge is making sure that the employee base is taken care of, and that's, I think, in many industries, people are grappling with that. Certainly in the bigger countries in the United States and Canada and Europe, they have really rich and deep government systems. In the Caribbean, those don't exist, certainly not even close to that extent. And in Turks and Caicos, it doesn't exist. The social safety net is not here. So that responsibility largely falls on the private sector. And I think of all the things that we are focused on, it's that one thing. It's how can we keep our people feeling safe, secure, keep bread on the table, and also sort of somehow emerge from this.
Dovetailing from that, what are some of the initiatives that Grace Bay Resorts is involved in terms of taking care of your employees, keeping them engaged, keeping them motivated?
Well, other than the obvious, which everybody's doing and we're doing right now, which is this Zoom communication, we've deployed that and we deployed it with our management team. But obviously at a level, sort of a step below that in terms of communication, those managers are communicating with their department heads and their employees on an ongoing basis. So there's actually an active engagement with our employees. The other thing that we've tried, and sometimes to mixed results, is to actually communicate messages through video. And so I've issued a video recently where I talk about what we're trying to accomplish, to try and give everybody a little sense of hope. And that seems to, with our employees, it seems to work, because there really is no communication, physical interaction at this moment in time. The other thing that we're also doing is soon, as the economy starts to go into its phase of reopening, we're going to reopen many of our hotel staff cafeterias. And subject to local regulations, we're going to reintroduce the meal plans and letting our employees come to the resorts, even though we're closed, and even if they're not working, because we'll obviously still do some work, but it'll be more cleanup and spruce up and training and things like that. But those employees who may not be on the payroll or may not be on the schedule, I should say, for a specific day, will be allowed to come to the resort and connect through our staff cafeterias in obviously a specific way, which may be defined by government. So we're hoping that that's going to have an impact. And then finally, we are rolling out our Staples program, where our managers and our employees will be going into the communities and delivering goods and services to those who may not be able to travel. Those kinds of things are going to be very valuable to us in the short term.
And Mark, you recently did a session with the TCHTA on, that equation between the financial and the people side of the operations. Obviously, a precarious situation and one that every hotelier is dealing with right now. Tell us a little bit more about some of the conversations that you're having with your owners, investors, and employees.
Well, I'll start with in the list in the order you gave. Interestingly, and you obviously know this, that we have a condo hotel model here that has really worked well for us, and it is something that we nurture very carefully. So starting with the owners, and when I say owners, I talk about the condo owners. There are owners of the condos, and then there are owners of the management companies or the real estate ownership companies, of which we're one. But the condo owners, interestingly, have this incredibly rich and powerful relationship with this destination. So when we've reached out to them with information about what's happening, they have actively asked to help, and invariably that help is focused around employees. So we have been communicating with them almost every week. So this is, even if it's the smallest bit of information, we say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is what the government is saying. And it's, it could be very simple information, it could be very complex information, it depends on what it is. But so the owners have been extremely engaged, and most importantly, they've wanted to help. With investors, I think investors are decidedly a different category, because they obviously have the same attitude that I have, because we as a company feel that broadly across our entire investor group about taking care of our employees. But they're focused more on how long and how much kind of support financially do we actually need to put into our organization to ensure the time frame that we're going through this crisis. And I think that is the biggest question all the time, is really, how long is this going to last? Right. How much can we deploy during that time to stay alive? And how are we going to restart this engine? Mm-hmm. That is the part that is the conversation with investors. And I would say in the investor group, I'd also include the banks. And the banks, I think, are, everybody's calling the bank right now saying, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? So they are also in that, how long is this going to last? What are we going to do sort of mindset? And I haven't got this strong sense that everybody is ready to say, do this, this, or this. It's kind of a blend of all three, and we're trying things as we go, and hopefully buying a little time with some of the decisions we make. And then finally, with employees, you get a wide range of responses to what's going on. There is the employee who cannot believe that he or she still is employed. The hotels are closed, there isn't a customer in sight, there's no airport, it's obvious nobody has any work, and yet they still receive a wage. And I think those employees are highly emotional about that fact. And that's, it's obviously, it's moving and stirring, but it's also sometimes a little bit depressing, because it just kind of, there's this sense of, when is somebody going to pull the rug out from under me? And we want to try and avoid that occurring.
What are you doing right now in terms of reinstilling confidence in your customer base, right? And your outreach to them? We're hearing a lot of companies start talking about, different health and hygiene standards. I think a message came out from Bill Marriott today, and then Christopher Nassetta from Hilton's talked about, the partnership with the Mayo Clinic and Lysol. So, as a team, what are some of the initiatives on your plate around sort of that health and safety piece?
Well, it's really interesting that Nassetta and Hilton did the Lysol piece, I think you just said. That's very intriguing, because it's kind of like a co-branding of dealing with hygiene and sanitization and cleanliness and what have you. And certainly a company of that size, that makes all the sense in the world. But there will be lessons to be learned from that very statement, because there are possible ways of doing that on a more handmade basis in our organization. Right? Because we're obviously much smaller, we're much more an independent operator. Maybe there's a way to find similar types of cleaning products companies that are more organic and more homegrown, that we can bring into our organization. Say we're doing it with, North Caicos Best or West Caicos Best, or, I don't know, Blue Hills in Providenciales, or perhaps just a Caribbean-based cleaning products company that makes it feel very indigenous and authentic. But to say, I think that everybody is expecting us to do all of the things you just alluded to. There's going to be a long list of new steps and processes that we deploy. And I think for us, because we are so, as you say, we're very close to our customers and it's very high touch, we're probably going to introduce things where we can show tangible things that are happening in the rooms. Maybe instead of the eco card we used to deliver, maybe it's a card that says, please note that we did this, 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 and this in your room today. This, the person was in your room at this time, not this time. And these are the steps that we're taking, and those can be quantified and sort of registered, if you like. I think that this is going to be an evolving process, and some of the things that we've taken for granted in the past, where people are joining together in big groups, may sort of take a while to get back to, whether it's buffets or it's in-room dining or it's turn-down service or things like that we think are absolutely essential. We may look at those differently.
Right. Okay, good. I like the idea of keeping it sustainable and keeping it to something that's local to the Caribbean too. I think that's also telling a great story right there, right, to support local. In terms of, reopening, is there a lot of dialogue right now in Turks and Caicos around where and when that might start to take place?
Well, not exactly. I would say inside the hotels, there's dialogue amongst us that we feel like most in the business community that we need to create a goal, even if there is no exact science to where we're going and when we're going to get there, or what if there is some deadline that we have to sort of arbitrarily set. We have to do that so that we can kind of work towards that, even if it changes. And so we're setting June 1st as that date right now. And that's being driven by the fact that the government has said the airport will not open until at least June 1st. So that doesn't mean it will open, and doesn't mean it won't open. So we figured, let's use that as a date, and let's just kind of work our energies around that. Mm-hmm. And so that if June 1st does happen and there's an announcement, we're ready. And we're preparing for that. That's probably the best answer I could give you at this stage.
No, and let's talk a little bit more about you. I mean, you obviously have a passion for development, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about your career and what brought you to Turks and Caicos. I know that you have, you studied business and French at USC.
Thank you for asking. I mean, it's. I don't want to bore you. It could take hours and it could take minutes. I'll try and give you the abridged version. Sure. I think like many kids, if you like, right out of college, I just was not ready to become the straight-laced business person in Los Angeles out of school. And French was one of my passions, so I just decided to follow that and moved to France. Ended up living in Europe for about a little over 6 years, and ultimately ended up. I think there was a couple of key components in that 6-year time frame, but one in particular was when I was living in Paris right out of school. I had a couple of close French friends, and I was really struggling with learning French and being immersed in the French culture, because in Paris all the English speakers find each other. And so I was working in a computer company, which I was in the computer business when I was in school. And ultimately, I approached one of my friends. I said, I just really need to be networking. I'd been taught networking at the entrepreneur program at USC. I'd been taught how to use connections around you to sort of advance your career. And I said, I just don't feel like I'm networking in Paris because I'm getting trapped in these English-speaking areas. And I said, I really want to immerse myself in France, and I'll be prepared to do anything. And he said, go to Saint-Tropez, because it was the coolest idea I'd ever heard. And so I basically just moved all my stuff to Saint-Tropez and started knocking on doors in that area until I found a job working on a beach as a plagiste. And for the next 8 months, I worked in Saint-Tropez, and I didn't speak a word of English for probably about 5 months. And all I did was rake sand, serve coffee, serve desserts, and networked. And believe it or not, while I was on that beach, about 6 months into it, I was driving a little boat to pick up somebody who'd parked in a yacht, and the boat pulls up and it says Hollywood, California on the back. And I asked the guy, "Are you from California?" And he looks at me strange because he's expecting me to speak with a French accent, and and he did. And I said, "Well, I went to USC," and so we got to talk. And turns out he's the president of Warner Brothers. So I talked to him. We spent a few days together. Ultimately, I ended up working for Warner Brothers as kind of a stagiaire, as they call it in France, just sort of an apprentice, if you like, for about a year. Anyway, long and short of it was, after a year back in Paris, after Saint-Tropez, I decided I wanted to be in the real estate business. And this time I was about 24. And I had this fortuitous meeting with Gary Player, a golf designer, famous golfer from South Africa. Many know him. And he was in partnership with a developer in Belgium, building a master plan golf and residential community. I was fluent in French by that time. I had a business degree, so I encouraged them some way to hire me. So that was when I started my real estate career, working in that development. Through that connection, I ended up in South Africa about 5 years later, starting my own business. So anyway, I ended up in South Africa by virtue of an introduction that Gary Player made to some investors in South Africa, and we started a condo hotel development company there. And that's where I learned this trade, in Cape Town. I spent 5 years in Cape Town building this company, and in 2000, I came back to the US, set up an office in Miami, and started scouring the Caribbean. Somebody tipped me off to Turks and Caicos in about late 2000. My first visit here was in April of 2001, and by July of 2001, we had Grace Bay Club under contract, and we bought it later that year. And so the rest is, here we are.
Okay. So hard as it is to imagine, but once life gets back to normal, which we all hope is sooner versus later, Mark, what's the destination that you're most excited to visit or go to?
Well, believe it or not, my wife's birthday is in June, and we have a plan to be in Paris, which is probably not going to happen. So that's the place we always love to go. We got married in France, and we've been there dozens of times together. That's the place we really want to go back to the most. France is, of course, one of the most popular destinations in the world. Even though we love the heat and love the sea and the ocean, that is certainly at the top of the list. The second would be most likely the Maldives. Maldives is just an absolute, you cannot replicate the experience in the Maldives anywhere in the world, in my experience. And it's someplace my wife really likes. I love it. And so that's probably the top two.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing, your thoughts and your insights. Of course, we wish you and the team the very best, and, hope that the recovery starts soon. I personally am very much looking forward to returning to TCI and enjoying a glass of rosé at Infinity and staring out at that beautiful sunset and remembering it for dear life. It's been a real pleasure. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you including me. And if there's any way we can help, let us know. But to anyone who's watching, stay positive. We're going to get through this. There's a better day ahead, right? It's got to be.
Yes.